So principle 2 is these choices matter. What choices? Competition, customers, technology, identity. Now we'll devote a lecture to each of these things, but let's run through briefly what these choices are all about, starting with the easiest one, choosing your customers. There is an empirical regularity in the diffusion of any product. It's a very simple one. It involves what is called an S-curve. If you plot over time the diffusion of a successful product, it has this elongated S-like shape. Initially it was hard to get traction, then there's a big takeoff, and then finally you reach some point of saturation. This is such a strong empirical regularity. It's a sort of relationship you can bank on and expect for any product. So strong, even holds upside down. Now the basis for this is if you look at it in growth space, that is how much you're growing each period of time, you noticed you grow a lot and then your growth rate starts to shrink. You're not growing negatively, you're just growing slower. Initially you have early adopters who buy your product. There aren't a huge amount of these, but they're important to get traction going. Then, if you're lucky, your product transitions into the mainstream, which is the early majority. That's when you get that really big period of take-up, and the early majority influences the late majority. And then finally, there are those people who are the last people to adopt a product, the laggards. Getting yourself onto this path, what you want to do is you want to find early adopters who will put you onto the early majority in some straightforward and hopefully timely manner. The hard part is choosing who the early adopters are. And one of the issues that comes up is you can often have confusion as to what your product is really about. Here's one of our favorite examples. Pratt's healing ointment for man and beast. We both use it. It cures harness and saddle galls, open wounds, cuts, sores, scratches, burns, every box guaranteed. Get it here today. Now, today we can see the problems with this sort of conflict. But did you notice it with our case of Volt a bit earlier? Let me remind you.
I do think that there is a little bit of a stigma when you say vegan anything, right? If you're not a vegan, other non-vegans are like, ew.
You know I'm not a vegan.
No, it's not.
I mean, I try to eat responsibly, but I'm just
stop it! Oh my God. I mean, it sort of had a hippie connotation to me.
For the longest time, all you could get was like a bamboo sack.
Exactly. Right? Yeah, for sure. And so when I started the company, to be able to grow, I was like, why would I start a company that if it wasn't going to meet the needs of a mainstream woman, then it's not going to do well and sustain itself and be a business that could grow, and it really doesn't need to exist.
Right. Millennials in particular have really moved the needle on where brands need to be in this political climate. So whether it's saving our oceans, saving our animals, working with LGBT youth, whatever it is, there has to be something that these brands stand for other than just making money. Because to do well, you're gonna have to do good.
I made it for anyone who is cold and wants to look stylish in the winter. And It doesn't matter what your values are, how extremely passionate you are about it. But the question then is, how do we get people to even look at it without thinking, oh, it's not for me because it's, it's not
because
vegan.
It's vegan.
Yeah.
You need a double marketing strategy.
Sure.
Right?
And,
because the idea is that you do want your niche vegans
to know how
hardcore you are about it, and also that they can finally find clothes that are chic, that are vegan.
Yeah.
But mainstream people are going to come to you because the clothes are beautiful, and then they're going to be able to pat themselves on the back for doing something that has a social good behind it.
Right.
See what happened there? A dual marketing strategy. Right here in front of you is a dual marketing strategy. You can see it's pretty stark here, but it's also stark in the case of Volt. Basically, you want to appeal to the vegans and then also a mass market. But does the mass market really get attracted by vegan things? I mean, they won't hate it, but is it what it's going to draw them there? Is it going to be what it gets them to investigate whether these coats could be really as comfortable as they're supposed to be? That's a real problem. So basically, this is part of a broader choice of which market S-curve you're going to be on. The vegan S-curve is a little stunted relative to the mass market one. So clearly Volt would want to be on the mass market one, but it's already leapt into this vegan market for reasons of its identity, which I'll come to later. These choices really matter. You have to choose an early adopter. If you look here are two recent entrants into the fitness wearable space. You can see in each product roughly the same design. Misfit is a fitness tracker that's built into jewelry. Whistle is a fitness tracker for, well, pets built into their jewelry. Basically the same thing. Obviously two very different strategies in terms of where they're trying to get adoption going. Now what's really interesting about this is that if one of them turns out to be wrong, who can change from that? How can you switch? Suppose that you've entered into the fashion industry and that didn't work out. Can you still switch to pets? What about the reverse? You've entered into the pet industry. Can you switch to pet fashion? Okay, looks like the former can happen. The latter's a little bit harder. Just FYI, both of these companies did really well, and neither of them are selling to these products quite now. But that's another story. For a given idea, there are multiple viable S-curves. Essentially, there are sort of two different directions you can go in, and you want to choose the S-curve that's going to get you to where you want to be. And for each S-curve, there are different initial customers that you target. We'll hear a little bit later from Moore on the left, who wrote a book, Crossing the Chasm. Basically says you want to choose hard to reach early adopters who are highly influential for subsequent adopters. Or Clay Christensen on the right, Disruption. Choose overserved customers who are either not consuming or low priority for established players. On the left, high-end customers. On the right, low-end customers. Those are not the same beachheads. It's going to turn out that it depends on other aspects of your strategy which one of these makes the most sense. The second choice is to choose your technology. Now, often technologies are part already of your underlying entrepreneurial opportunity. But there are a whole lot of other technological choices that get placed above and beyond that. In the case of Volt, it was all about how they're going to manufacture it. They're going to manufacture it in the US. Are they going to manufacture it overseas? Can they adhere to their tight standards? And what are the materials they're going to use? Obviously, those choices are bundled up with their identity as well. Technology has its own S-curve. This is the technology S-curve. On the x-axis is effort or funds invested. On the right axis is performance. Basically, for any given technology, initially it's very hard to get improvements of performance. Then things coalesce and then you move to some technological limits in the end. What's interesting about all these things is there could be multiple S-curves that are nested on each other. An old S-curve and then maybe a new S-curve. In this situation, entrepreneurs face the choice between developing on that old S-curve, which might be leading to diminished returns, or picking a new S-curve, which you can see here initially is of worse performance than the old S-curve, and then building your basis on that. This sort of choice happened initially with self-driving cars. Google, initially, built self-driving cars off the basis of the old S-curve, modifying existing vehicles. Then, a few years ago, pivoted to completely new vehicles, completely new designs and a new S-curve. At the moment, none of those worked out, but you can see what's going on here. You can see some of these choices and dilemmas that get made. The third choice is your choice of identity. And this is a whole lot of things. From founder objective to what internal capabilities you should stress, to where you position yourself externally, and in what ecosystem you might locate in. And this is often some of the hardest choices you have to make. Now, obviously, Volt started off with a choice of identity that is being able to build clothes that are vegan or use these sustainable materials and so on. So that was a choice that they made. It's founder objective, and it drove a whole lot of other things. And you can see here on their website that they push this towards consumers. Okay? You know, while they said it was shockingly warm, constructed in America, it was also eco-conscious and 100% vegan. The warmest coat for your warmest heart. Don't know what that means. Invest in a cruelty-free, made in New York City, coziest Volt sweater. That's what the little pop art is saying right there. Okay, they're not saying get the best sweater, the most comfortable coat, etc. No, get a cruelty-free one. That's front and center. But they, in the end, as you saw from the video, they'd made a coat that was actually could stand on its own. And so this is quite interesting. So they had this dilemma in which they were appealing to vegans, to people with a particular identity of their own, and yet they made a coat that may well be suitable for the mass market. And even the person in the video who was not a vegan was struggling with this entire concept. And you ended up with problems. Is this a vegan company? Or is this just a better coat, for which it happens to be also vegan, if you want that? You have to make a choice of which way to go. Volt didn't make that choice. And as you saw by the end of that video, they've got problems. They weren't able to deal with what they had, and in the end, they're now on a hiatus trying to figure out what to do. My guess is they're either going to relaunch as vegan and solely that, or they're going to bring up a new coat, and we won't see vegan in the stuff already, the materials at all. We'll wait and see. The final choice is to choose your competition. We already saw this earlier in this lecture with the choice of Webvan and Peapod. Webvan chose to compete with existing supermarkets. Peapod chose to cooperate with them. This sort of choice happens all the time. You'll see this through all of Creative Destruction Lab companies and lots of accelerators. Startups grapple with this choice, and they grapple earlier on. Once again, you have to understand what is a choice, what can be reversed, etc. Those are some of the things we'll deal with in a later lecture. Finally, the end result of all this is you're going to do investigations, you're going to investigate a lot of strategy, and we want you to come down and not just do one business plan, but two. For each startup should have at least 2 business plans thought out of equally viable strategies, but distinct in the underlying basis for which they would turn out to be the best thing. These are not things you can know about, but at least you want to present those 2 options. If choice is going to matter, we have to give our entrepreneurs a choice. So we want you to pick 2 and then choose one, the one to pursue it first. And that will be the methodology we will be applying throughout this course, including assignments. Coming up, we're going to go through the 4 choices individually and in more depth. We're then going to coalesce and think about 4 distinct strategies, these choices mattering together. And finally, I'm going to introduce the Entrepreneurial Strategy Canvas to you. That is a way for thinking through how entrepreneurs should formulate their strategy at the beginning.